Queensland had a reputation for being a state where collective action had been pioneered and accepted and entrenched. And we see in 1985 the beginnings of the demolition of that collective action and the pitting of different sectors of the community against each other. A watershed in industrial relations and just politics in general in Queensland. And it really was where conservative forces and unions collided head on. But the particular issue in the CQEB dispute was the use of contract labour to replace permanent employees. With the wisdom of hindsight, we can actually recognise it's the beginning of the modern era where so much employment has become contract-based. It's very clear that this is an issue that Joh Bjelke-Petersen is absolutely obsessed with. He really thinks unions have no place in the modern workforce and no place in politics. So what he was doing was to crush the power of the unions. The 1980s are also probably the pinnacle of what's called the Rat Pack, the organised corruption in the Queensland Police. Some of what they got up to was exposed by Fitzgerald, but some of it was not. Certainly, the Police Commissioner has a very direct contact with the Premier. In fact, he can bypass the Police Minister. But of course, the main issue of law and order is the existence of prostitution and gambling quite openly in parts of Brisbane, even though the government denied that there was any such activity taking place. The Electoral Districts Act of 1985 is just a further refinement of existing legislation which once again entrenches the National Party in power. And the seats in rural areas, particularly in the more isolated country areas, the seats actually have very few voters. So there is not even a pretense of equality of voting representation. The Mabo case had been running for a number of years, but in 1985 the Queensland Government ramped up efforts to block and obstruct native title in Queensland. And in particular, they funded legal work opposing Eddie Mabo and the others on that claim by arguing that native title had never existed and passing legislation to overrule any sort of findings that it might have. Native title is something that clearly the National Party vehemently opposes. The regulations over the staples are mind-boggling. Bread, eggs, milk. One of the things that the Cabinet discusses is how will people buy petrol on a public holiday, because the service stations are not allowed to open in Brisbane. You are not allowed to have a shop in a service station in Brisbane selling milk and bread, because that would compete with the local shops. There is a lot of time spent in Cabinet discussing this issue of combined service stations and shops. On the other hand, there's a situation where the Cabinet decides they're going to vacate the field on regulating the number of shopping centres. And there are complaints from the Gold Coast that there are now too many shopping centres. So again, we can see the transition to the modern era where the old style family-owned businesses fading away, being replaced by franchises, multinational chains, which are all gathered together in these massive shopping centres. 1985 is actually a really important year because it's the year that Johannes Bjelke-Petersen is knighted by the Queen, and he's also granted an honorary doctorate by the University of Queensland. There was a major protest at the university, particularly from staff as well as from students. So the Premier receives his doctorate at a private ceremony in Parliament House sometime afterwards. The granting of honorary degrees is the prerogative of the Senate of the university. It's very unclear as to why they chose to award this honorary degree to the Premier. There's certainly no sign of anything he had ever done that might have benefited the university.